EAGLES, Eagles.
What's good, Eagles fans? I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. You guys are locked in on football 24/7. And of course, I'm joined by our Eagles insider, John McMullen. Before we get too deep into the content, you guys, you know what to do. You know what I need you to do. Smash that like button. Make sure you guys always stay engaged in the content. Also, make sure you guys are always subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. There you'll find other content like Birds 365 featuring Jody Mack and John McMullen, Sports Take featuring Derek Gunn and Rob Ellis, the National Football Show with Dan Cilio, so much more content, the pre, halftime, and post-game show featuring Seth Joyner, Mike Missinelli, Derek Gunn, Kayla Santiago, Mark Farzetta, Bill Colarulo. So much different content going on for you guys. Make sure you guys always stay locked in because there's always something special going on the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. Now, John, I have a question for you. You know, you've been covering this game for a long time. You've covered the NBA. You've covered the NFL. You're a sports guy. You're a big wrestling fan. You know, I'm curious to know what's the most fascinating part of the game of football to you to cover? You know, what part of football really gets your juices flowing?
Boy, that's a tough question. But now it was easier earlier in my career. Now, what is the most exciting part of covering football?
What stimulates you the most?
Knows.
What is it?
No, it's definitely the people. You know, when you have engaging people, it's much easier. So, you know, we're lucky in Philadelphia to have Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata, you know, a lot of offensive linemen. They're just really thoughtful and, you know, not a big fan of, you know, if you're a baseball fan, you watch Bull Durham back in the day where Kevin Costner teaches Tim Robbins how to answer questions about, you know, I just want to help the ball club. Yeah, that's not good. So you want guys who are sort of thoughtful and engaging, and the Eagles have a lot of those guys. So we're lucky in Philadelphia from that standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, on top of that, they have a lot of talented individuals. And, you know, a team as talented, as dynamic as the Philadelphia Eagles, not just on the field, but off the field, it really makes them a great cover in terms of just, when you compare them to other NFL teams. You know, this team, as a matter of fact, you know, they're 2-0 entering the season, right? They beat the Patriots, they beat the Vikings, but a lot of people were really uncomfortable. A lot of fans in particular have been really uncomfortable with how they've been getting the job done. Now, I'm of the mindset, hey, they're 2-0. Of course, there are some things to clean up, but it's the beginning of the season. You got 2 new coordinators. You know, some bumps along the road should be expected. But I'm curious to know, after everything you've seen over the past couple weeks, what's stood out to you? What are some of your takeaways from the Philadelphia Eagles on both sides of the ball over the past couple of weeks?
You know, it hasn't been pretty, but it's not surprising early in the season. We talk about the preseason and how the Eagles go about it. So it's almost like an extension of the preseason, those first 2 games. Hopefully it doesn't bleed over to much more than that. So I don't think people should be surprised at sloppy football, and that's not just Philadelphia. That's basically everywhere in the NFL. And, you know, the Eagles are able to persevere. That to me is the mark of a good team. I always make the baseball analogy with pitchers and, you know, the old school pitchers, not now because nobody throws, but, you know, if you were an ace, you know, sometimes you don't have your good stuff, but you find a way to grind through and get your team a win. That's sort of the Eagles. They didn't have their best stuff, but you look at the last column, win. You know, they find a way to win. And that's what the NFL is about. It's not, you know, in college, you got to work for style points. We talked about it with Penn State. You know, they got criticized from running up the score. You should never criticize a college team from running up the score because they got morons voting on where they're ranked. You know, and if they don't look good, they might fall from 4 to 5, and all of a sudden they're not in a position to be where they want to go. So they have to have style points a lot of times. Not in the NFL. Dallas had a lot of style points against the Giants. Their win equaled exactly the Eagles' win in New England. No more, no less. That's the only goal in the NFL, to get out with a win. And we now got 20 games. The last 20 games with Jalen Hurts as the starting quarterback, the Eagles have won 19 in the regular season. 19 out of 20. They find ways to win games. And people act like last year was all peaches and cream offensively. They had bad games. They had a bad game in Arizona. They had a bad game in Houston. They had a bad game in Indy. Generally the road games. But they had some bad games. But they find ways to win. That's the mark of a good team.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. They even had a bad game versus the New Orleans Saints at home. So, but granted, Jalen Hurts wasn't there. But but ultimately, you're right though. They've had some bad games last season. They were, they were far in between and sparse apart. But the reality is, this is the NFL, and you don't get more, credit, or you don't get an extra W for beating your opponent 40-0, or you don't get an extra W, for beating your opponent 34-7 or whatever the Niners beat the Pittsburgh Steelers by. But, here's my thing, right? This is the part that's so fascinating about this team, especially with how we looked at it throughout the offseason. All offseason, the narrative has been, well, Brian Johnson, him and Jalen Hurts have this relationship, and we don't really expect, and this is the fans talking, right? We don't really expect any hiccups, or we don't really expect too much turbulence with that offensive coordinator role. We expect to see most of the turbulence on the defensive side with Sean Desai. And interestingly enough, the defense, in my humble opinion, has actually led the way for the offense. What's been your thoughts on just that narrative and how it's materialized through the first couple weeks of the season?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that yesterday. I think the offense was better than the defense yesterday. They just ran the football. I don't care how you do it. They had 259 yards rushing. I said, DeAndre Swift had a great game, and that's true. But, you look at the advanced stats, 133 of his 175 yards were before contact last night. He didn't get touched. At the game, the people know who attended the game live, these holes were massive. You point that to the other running back on Minnesota, Alexander Madison, who's going through some stuff today, which is freaking disgusting, by the way. But for people that saw that, but he had nothing, no space. The offensive line of the Eagles won that game. So what? But people like numbers. Fantasy football. I don't know what it's fueled by. Maybe it's fantasy football.
I think it is. I think it's strictly fantasy football.
Yeah. I mean, Kirk Cousins, 31 of 44, 364, 4 touchdowns. So what? Passer rating, 125.6. He didn't win a football game. Justin Jefferson, 11 for 159. Great player. Didn't win a football game. Eagles won a football game with A.J. Brown catching 4 for 29. Eagles won a football game with Jalen Hurts throwing for under 200 yards. I'd rather win the game than lose the game, so you can have your numbers. I'll take the offensive line.
Yeah, I can't really argue with the results either, John, because when you have a guy like DeAndre Swift rushing for well over 100, well over 150 yards, 175, I think to be exact. I mean, what more can you ask for? I mentioned earlier the relationship that's been spoken about with Jalen Hurts and Brian Johnson. This off the field relationship, Brian Johnson and his father, they've known each other since he was 4 years old, and Brian Johnson played under his father. Jalen Hurts.
I mean, Brian. Brian is 36, 37, somewhere in that range.
Right.
He met Jalen when Jalen was 4 years old.
Right.
Did people think he was talking about NFL football with Jalen Hurts at 4 years old?
I'm glad you went there. Let's stay there for a second because the reality is this, because I've really thought about this. And I'll admit I was one of the people who maybe put too much stock into the relationship off the field. But I think this is where they are right now. This is where I am after I've watched the first 2 games. As high quality as their relationship is off the field, it doesn't necessarily always translate to the on the field chemistry, because the reality is they have to create, build, and develop this new relationship, this new quarterback play caller relationship. Their relationship off the field is more so as peers and as contemporaries, whereas the on the field, Jalen and Brian Johnson, they have to establish some kind of flow, continuity, chemistry, and that's something that just isn't built off the field. You have to get that through real game reps. Now, through all the speed bumps and the hiccups that they're experiencing, the off the field relationship can help them navigate that because there's a trust. But at the end of the day, the on-field relationship that we need to see materialize, that we haven't quite seen just yet, that's only going to get done by live game reps.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, they have a good relationship. I mean, but it developed in 2021 as a professional relationship. I mean, Brian, like I said, he met him when he was 4 years old. He had more of a relationship with Jalen's father, obviously. You're not talking football with a 4-year-old. Then he tried to recruit Jalen when Jalen went to Alabama, Mississippi State, and he tried to recruit him again when he transferred to Oklahoma. And by the way, he lost both times. So, he wasn't able to recruit him to Mississippi State or Florida. So I don't know. Their professional relationship dates back to 2021, just like Nick Sirianni and Kevin Patullo and Shane Steichen before this year. They all came in together, and they all have worked and have good relationships with Jalen. It's the same offense. They're struggling now with the passing game. I think that has more to do with the adjustments made by 2 very good defensive coaches. Bill Belichick saw the Eagles on the schedule week 1, and that's what you do. You spend the entire offseason. All right, this is what Philadelphia did well last year. Bang, bang, bang. We want to take this away. We want to take this away. We want to take this away. Same thing with Brian Flores. Now the Eagles have to adjust, and we'll see if they can. They did yesterday, but they adjusted in a way a lot of people, it's funny because you have one group that run the football all the time. They want to go back to 1975. And like I said, that 16-play drive where they ran it 13 times, that was the greatest drive ever for that group. Then you have the other group, let's call them the fantasy football group, that just wants numbers from the skill position players. And they want things done a certain way. The core is the offensive line, and that's a good thing because they can default to the offensive line, and they can do it both ways. So Minnesota was taken away. They were doing some stuff, a lot of blitzing, making Jalen sort of uncomfortable, uncertain, and they just ran the ball. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. They said, all right, you're going to do this. We're going to do that. Inside zone, inside zone, inside zone, inside zone. They didn't add a man in the box because they were worried about them getting loose with Jalen in the running game or the passing game. And the Eagles took what they gave them. That's a good thing.
You mentioned Jalen looking uncomfortable, right? They've thrown these past couple weeks. He's had his full serving of defensive play callers really making him uncomfortable back there. I'm curious to know, what exactly are you seeing that they're doing that's making him uncomfortable? Because, they spent all this time in the offseason preparing for Jalen, right? Like you said, Bill Belichick had 6 or 7 months to prepare for Jalen Hurts, right? Brian Flores, all the teams that they're going to play is going to have plenty of time to prepare for what they do. They had a larger sample size because of the playoffs and so on and so forth. But what specifically are they doing to make Jalen Hurts uncomfortable? And what can Jalen Hurts do? What can Brian Johnson and those guys do to counter the counter?
Well, the one thing is, I mean, there's been a lot of blitzing over the first 2 weeks with a spy generally to try to limit Jalen getting out and running the football. The Eagles never, even last year, they didn't use a lot of sight adjustments or hot routes, and they generally just went bubble screen, wide receiver screen to deal with pressure.
I'm kind of over those, by the way. I think they need to completely delete those out of the playbook.
I've been over those since I've been over those since the first 5 I've seen, but it's got to be perfectly blocked. It's a nightmare. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that play. But they rely on it way too much. I'd like to see them evolve. They have, great receivers. Use the slant. You got AJ Brown. I mean, look at his body. He can play power forward on people, just box them out on defensive backs. You have Dallas Goedert, who hasn't gotten involved. You have Devontae. I mean, Devontae had a big day, but he was the only one. They have these players, utilize them, but too much bubble screen. They gotta evolve their pressure, how they handle pressure. They have to evolve it, unless they're going to keep getting it. And if they don't, then get used to the running game, because that's going to have to be how they win games.
So what forces a team to evolve? I mean, we've seen this team all last year. We've seen the playbook, we've seen the plays, we've seen the bubble screens, so on and so forth. You're saying they need to evolve from that. We have 2 straight games of the offense kind of being stifled because
it's not like that's a large sample size.
You're right.
I see we've gotten another question about, would Nick take away the play calling from Brian Johnson?
I don't think that's
no. First of all, no, he's not taking the play calling away.
I agree.
He's not taking the play calling. Now, that doesn't mean if Brian has a terrible year, but he's not taking it. It would be Kevin Patullo or somebody else. He's made a decision that he wants to oversee the whole team, and he likes the way he can run the team, and he gets too bogged down with play calling. So he doesn't want to do it. But for those that saying he should take it away from Brian Johnson, that's absurd. I mean, they're 2-0. They played 2 games. If you start to get midway through the season and you start to lose some football games, all right, and the offense is still struggling, the passing game still struggling, I'll listen to it. They're not going to change at that point either. But all right. But come on, 2 games and you're 2-0.
That's why it's 2 games. We have to really the bottom line is, no matter how we want to see it, the reality is you have a quarterback and a coordinator that has not worked with each other in this capacity before. They have to figure out the ebbs and flows of this dynamic that they're trying to build here.
Yeah, and again, it revisionist history. Like Shane was a great play caller here, but he had bad games. I just brought up the 3 most notable ones. Nobody's perfect. It's more about the players than anything else, and that's why it's good. Like you saw again. You can run down the Vikings numbers from a passing attack, but they were one-dimensional. Half of the time when you have these numbers, it's because you have to have these numbers because you're behind by 20 points and you're trying to desperately come back in the game. So even if they could run the football, which they couldn't, they wouldn't because they were so far behind. So if you throw it more, well, you're going to get more yardage. common sense. Yeah, in a lot of ways, fantasy football has ruined people's evaluation of professional football because nobody cares about the offensive line, and that's the most important part of this team by far, followed by the defensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. Stand on the offensive side for one more question.
Well, I should say quarterback's always first, but
right.
after quarterback.
But stand on the offensive side. DeAndre Swift, man, his ability to just be patient back there and just make the right cuts. His vision was on full display last night. It was really something to behold. On top of the offensive line, doing their job, on a tremendous level and run blocking, right? What's been your thoughts on the offensive line play these past couple weeks? In my humble opinion, I think pass pro could be a lot better, but I also believe that Jalen Hurts has held onto the ball for longer than he normally would. But I think that's kind of what you get with a guy like him who's used to making things happen back there, in the scramble drill and being a playmaker. But he's been sacked 7 times over the past 2 games. I think 2 or 3 of those can be given to him. But what's been your thoughts on this offensive line? And then to take it to another level, how have you felt about this offensive line coupled with the newfound rushing attack with DeAndre Swift?
Well, that's the 10th time they've rushed for 200 yards in the Nick Sirianni era, so it's not like it's new. They've been doing this for a while, and they can't do it at will because they're said, look, you can always stop the run if you want to stop the run against anybody. You can put 11 guys in the box, you're going to stop the run. So it's a give and take. But when teams try to play light boxes like Minnesota did, they're going to gouge them pretty regularly. And you saw that happen. And, I get why we just talked about it. I get why people are excited about DeAndre Swift. I get it. But 133 yards before he was touched. That's I can't think of the last time that happened. That's absurd. That means his career high was 144 against the Eagles. He almost matched his career high without being touched. So
to add perspective to that, he had 9 broken tackles, he forced 9 missed tackles, through all those yards he accumulated. That's more than any running back had in week 1, and the highest was 6. Yeah,
and he had a very good game, but he was the first one to say after the game, that offensive line, kind of did some things for him.
Makes your job a little easier, right?
Yeah. So, those who think, they have the second coming of insert name, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, I don't think so. But, I'll just point you to Boston Scott's statistics yesterday before his concussion. He was averaging 8 yards a carry. That typically you don't have that kind of dominance in an NFL game, front versus front. It's very rare. And part of it is, let's be honest, Minnesota is a very poor front. The Eagles have a great offensive line. So you're not going to see that every week. Next Monday night, you got Vita Vea, you got Devin White, you got Levante David, you got Shaq Barrett, on and on and on and on. You're not going to see that. So part of it was competition. Part of, styles make bites. I talked about it all week. Same thing on the other side, defensive line against their offensive line. On the other hand, the back seven struggled. When Cousins was able to throw the ball, they struggled because they're not going to be able to cover Jefferson or Hawkinson or Osborne, but he dropped the football. Jordan Addison, big plays. they struggled. It's no surprise. They have better, that matchup favored them. But those matchups are more important, the offensive line, defensive line. And that's why the Eagles won the game.
So what's been your thoughts about the offensive line in terms of pass pro? Because Jordan Mailata, he had one of the highest PFF grades at the offensive line position, the highest they've seen since week 12 in 2013. He had a 96.9 offensive lineman grade. Obviously, that includes run blocking and pass protection. Most of that definitely came on the side of run blocking. But not to say he doesn't deserve that benchmark, but in my humble opinion, I feel like the pass protection hasn't been as tight as the run blocking has. What's been your thoughts on the Eagles and pass pro?
Well, they were great yesterday. If you talk about PFF, yeah, Jordan was over 90. They sort of have, when you're blue chip, and that's what Jordan was. Then they have sort of green light players, red light players in between. Every single one of them, Lane, Landon, Jason, Cam, were all in the green. So everybody had a big day on pass protection, except the backs. The backs were terrible picking up the blitz.
Yeah,
DeAndre and Rashad
Penny had the most egregious one.
Yeah, they were bad picking up the blitz, and that's where the Vikings got the Eagles a little bit, was on the blitz. But as far as the core offensive line, they were good. And, as weird as it sounds, they got generally better pass block grades than run block grades.
Interesting.
Kelsey didn't have his best day. Cam wasn't great in run blocking. Jordan was phenomenal. Landon was great, and Lane was great. But they were better as a group pass blocking than run blocking. It's a good group. It's a good group. And it's not sexy. So people are always going to talk about Jalen and obviously Devontae and AJ Dallas and now DeAndre Swift. They know, though, every single one of them. It's almost they always make sure to give their flowers to the offensive line because they know where the bread is buttered, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love giving credit to guys like Devontae Smith and run blocking as well. I mean, he had a pretty big run block on the right side of the field. I think it was a DeAndre Swift run. He helped him break that one big. A guy like Devontae Smith, unsung hero in the run blocking game because of how slight his build is. You mentioned the Eagles, in your opinion, did pretty well. Also, by PFF, did pretty well in pass pro. Obviously, the blitz, they're sending an extra guy, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. It seems like the only way other teams can get pressure on Jalen Hurts or even stress his offensive line is when they're blitzing. Now, granted, I know the blitz stresses any offensive line, but the way this Philadelphia Eagles team is set up, it just seems like teams can get home with their front four, no matter who it is, for the most part, and that's pretty much the only thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Lane hasn't given up a sack since 1945. So, I mean, yeah, you're not getting by Lane.
Jordan, but what I'm trying to get to, right, was the fact that at this point, teams are going to blitz Jalen Hurts. That's at least it seems like that's the game plan for defense thus far. Blitz Jalen Hurts and force him to make a decision. I feel like this coaching staff could do a better job at countering the blitz. I'm having a hard time understanding.
Well, that's where I bring up that's where I bring up the site adjustments in the hot routes. I think they have to evolve in that aspect of it. But not everybody. I mean, they're going through this stretch, and it'll probably continue in Tampa because it's Todd Bowles. But you're going to get to the Fangio defense. They're playing Fangio this year. he's not going to blitz. So you're not going to see it all 17 weeks. You just happen to have this grouping at the start of the schedule that is, very savvy defensive minds. You're going to get to groupings. I mean, they play Jonathan Gannon late. He's not going to blitz. Vic's not going to blitz. The Rams aren't going to blitz. They're a Fangio team. The Jets, they might do some blitzing. So you're going to have a different group. Dan Quinn's a great coordinator, but he's more of a cover 3 guy. San Francisco, you have Steve Wilkes. They're not a huge blitzing team. The Giants are a blitzing team, so it goes back and forth. It's going to be an ebb and flow, but not everybody's going to try to replicate what Bill and Brian just tried to do. Nobody's going to replicate what Brian does because Brian's a schizophrenic, man. I love that dude because he leads the NFL in blitzes and he leads the NFL in 8-man coverages. Never been done before. He's a lunatic the way he changes from play to play. It's not working for him just yet, but he doesn't have a lot of talent. If he gets some talent, he's going to be a problem.
Before we begin to close out the show, I'm looking at the schedule, and you said a bunch of names, Todd Bowles, Brian Flores, Bill Belichick, guys like that. It just seems like these first several weeks, Vic Fangio, these first several weeks of the season, not just this roster is going to be tested from a depth perspective, but this coaching staff seems like they're going to be tested more than they've ever had before. They're going up against some pretty stout minds. They've already gone up against Brian Flores and Bill Belichick, but then Todd Bowles, and you got Ron Rivera, and then you got the New York Jets. Their defense is really astounding right now. Vic Fangio in Miami, and then Dallas, Dan Quinn over there. That defense is looking as fierce as they've ever have been. This, we can end it here, right? What's your thoughts on how this coaching staff is going to handle this amount of pressure they're going to be under? Because I don't think this team or this staff has really been challenged the way they're going to be challenged, from a defensive mind perspective. So what's your thoughts on just the upcoming matchups from a coaching perspective when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles over the next several weeks?
Well, I mean, they generally win games. So 19 out of 20 is pretty good. Nick's proven to be a pretty good coach. I think, people look outside. We've talked about it defensively a lot because, I've said it's not about disliking the coordinator. Eagles fans, a lot of Eagles fans, not all, they dislike Jonathan Gannon, but they dislike his personality. And if they don't dislike his personality, they dislike the way the Eagles play football. It's not really a dislike they dislike the scheme, the philosophy, sitting back, trying to limit explosive plays. They want to be aggressive, and they want to, but that's a double-edged sword, which you saw yesterday with Minnesota. Yeah, it worked for a quarter, right up until it didn't work. So, I mean, for people that saying they didn't do this, they didn't do that, I pointed, and I said this on Birds 365. There were 2 key points to this game, in my estimation. The Vikings scored. They had 1 lead in the game. They scored a touchdown. Is that TJ Hawkinson 5-yard touchdown early in the second quarter. And what did the Eagles do? That was the 16-play drive. That right after. That was the answer. 16 plays, 13 runs, inside zone, inside zone, inside zone, inside zone, inside zone. They said, all right, you're going to play light boxes. We're just going to gas you. And they went right down the field, answered, took the lead back. They never lost the lead. But when the Vikings cut it to 27-21, and you're going, oh, looked like the game was over. It's 27-7. They made it 27-21. 7:40 left in the game. You're saying, if they stop them here, hold on to your hats. And the Eagles, 8 plays, 75 yards. Bang, bang, bang. Answered both times. And when you do that, that tells me something. The assumption is you got to go 100% for 60 minutes. Everybody has ebbs and flows. Everybody has lulls. But when you're challenged and they say, oh, we're losing, they're within the score late in the game, and you got the football and you go on these long drives, that's pretty impressive.
On that note, you guys, listen, make sure you guys smash that like button and stay engaged into the channel on JAKIB Sports, man. There's so much content flowing. You guys are locked in football 24/7 with John McMullen. You guys can also catch him on Birds 365 with Jody Mack as well. Then you got Sports Take with Derek Gunn and Rob Ellis. You got the National Football Show with Dan Cilio. You got the pre, halftime, and post-game show with Mike Missinelli, Seth Joyner, Derek Gunn, Kayla Santiago, Mark Forzetta, Bill Colarulo. On top of that, you have John McMullen providing correspondence from the Novacare Complex and from Lincoln Financial Field every single week. Man, JAKIB Sports is, some of the best out here, giving you your Eagles content. You guys need to make sure you lock in on that. I firmly believe that. John, you do a lot of amazing work for JAKIBsports.com. You do a lot of amazing work for SI.com, SportsIllustrated.com. What do you got? What are you working on? What's coming up on the horizon for you?
I just wrote about Josh Sweat over at SI. I mean, he had a tremendous game, and part of it is obviously I was looking forward to Josh Sweat against Christian Darrisaw, and who's one of the best young left tackles in football. He hurt his ankle in week 1. And he was dressed. So we're sitting there 90 minutes before the game and they made him active. And we're like, oh, this is going to be interesting, because a lot of us thought he wasn't going to play. And then he tweaked the ankle in pregame. He didn't play. And poor Oli Udoh was out there trying to deal with Josh Sweat. And Josh took advantage, man. I think he had 31 pass rushes, 8 pressures. He was all over Kirk Cousins, made him very uncomfortable, had the big strip sack that led to a very short field, as in 7 yards, that gave the Eagles a touchdown. Just a tremendous player. And it's always interesting to me, because you heard that narrative last year. Well, the Eagles only beat bad quarterbacks. They can't beat good quarterbacks. Why use Hassan Reddick? Everybody says, where's Hassan Reddick? Well, Hassan Reddick had to go up against Brian O'Neill, who's probably the best right tackle in football, not named Lane Johnson. He was going against a really, really good player. And he's got a broken thumb. Well, not broken, but surgically repaired. So he's not himself to begin with. Had a tough day. Josh got to play a backup. Guess what? He took advantage of it. That's what good players do. When there's a mismatch, you got to make that mismatch pay off. And that's exactly what Josh Sweat did. But it seems that people only recognize it when it's the quarterback position.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, John, what we're going to do tomorrow, because we're giving you guys a double header of football 24/7 tomorrow. Me and John are going to still work out the time. But you guys will definitely know when that's going to be. Tomorrow, John, I definitely want to get more into the defensive side of the ball. We spoke a lot about offense today, but I really want to dive a little deeper into that defensive side, because I don't know. I'm still of the mindset that this defense has been, kind of been the driving force behind some of these wins. You can make an argument some of this offensive production wouldn't be possible without the short fields that the defense is creating. But again, I want to save that dialogue for tomorrow. So I just want to tee you up right there, cue you up, make sure you know exactly what I'm going to hit you with tomorrow. But again, you guys, smash that like button. Make sure you guys always stay engaged in the channel on JAKIB Sports. Subscribe to the channel as well. Be on the lookout for more content from John McMullen himself on Birds 365 with Jody Mack, Sports Take with Derek Gunn and Rob Ellis, the National Football Show with Dan Cilio, the pre, halftime, and post-game show featuring Seth Joyner, Mike Missinelli, Derek Gunn, Kayla Santiago, Mark Farzetta, Bill Colarulo, and John McMullen as well. Also, some other content on the channel that's growing rapidly with the Philly Godfather giving you some of the best sports bets, some of the best sports betting advice in the market right now. And also, This Week in Pro Sports, This Week in Pro Football. That's another series that we have as well. So make sure you guys always stay locked in with that. Pat Callahan does an amazing job. We appreciate you guys locking in on the content as always. Smash that like button. This has been Football 24/7 with John McMullen. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. We'll see you guys next time.
EAGLES, Eagles.